as not being able to attend church tomorrow, which left me on reflection, as it has done all this week, about the actual need for church. As I've entitled these devotions, We Are the Church. And it occurred to me as I was praying in my devotions that is there a real need for a sanctuary? Is there a real need for a building? And obviously from the Old Testament, that was a very clear indication that there was. This was where God dwelt among the people in first the tabernacle, first the Garden of Eden, then in the tabernacle, then in the temple. And with Jesus' death and resurrection, the church took on a different premise, but actually the need to commune together was very real and has been since the dawn of time, actually. It is one of those interesting pieces to look at, that if we physically didn't have a building, if we didn't have a church or a sanctuary or something we call a church, would a church still exist? And the answer is yes. People would get together. They would get together in open spaces, and they would get together in their homes. They would get together in parking lots. They would come together to commune. That is the natural draw and the privilege that it means to be called a follower of Christ, a child of Christ, a unity, a common people, a holy priesthood set apart. But what if our church actually needed us? What if the actual sanctuary really needs us to be a part and parcel of the community around it? And it's not by haphazard that for generations and centuries of time, people have built a church first as the center of their community, for which they would then gather as a community on the Sabbath day. And as we prepare for our Sabbath day, it's something to think about. Our church stands as a huge, I'm going to reuse the word, our sanctuary stands as a huge beacon within the city itself. And there are many, many churches in Savannah. Ours, where it's positioned with its big steeple, really stands out. And there have been, over the last 50 years, there have been many people who have stopped in the sanctuary in order to look for help, in order to look for purpose, and in order to look for serenity and calm in times of the storms of their lives, and to look for like-minded people whom they can look at and will look at them without judgment and would look at them with joy. Our church stands as a symbol of a completeness, a direction, a purpose. And we should never forget that is actually God's purpose for how we want to live our lives. Jesus said in Matthew 28 that we are to go out to all nations. And our sanctuary does that. Our sanctuary is in the middle of all nations in Savannah that people can see it. And I was drawn to the Psalms this evening as the scripture that I want to read to us today, and it's Psalm 90. And I want us to understand that we've gone through the praise and we've gone through our gifts and how we all are part of the church and add to the church. We've gone through all of these various distinctions that kind of accumulate, that state that it's not just the purpose of being the church within ourselves. We are physically meant to gather, and we are meant to gather regularly in order to fulfill God's ultimate purpose. And if you look at Psalm 90, and it's a beautiful psalm. Actually, I love reading the Psalms, and I do so from the King James Version, although I'm reading from the NASB this evening. I think the King James does a phenomenal job of the Psalms. That sort of old style writing gives it an almost sing-song type genre, which is important when you look at the Psalms and what they're meant to be, of rejoicing, right? So Psalm 90, verses 1 through 4. Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were born, or thou didst give birth to the earth and the world. Even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. Thou dost turn man back into dust, and dost say, Return, O children of men, for 1,000 years in thy sight are like yesterday when it passes by, or as a watch in the night. And what the psalmist is saying here is that God has dwelt in us from the very dawn of time, from the very beginning. He knew us from the dawn of time. He fashioned us from the dawn of time. And that part of the church is there's always been a dwelling of God, a dwelling place for God. And yes, that dwelling place now is within us, but it doesn't stop or change that we are to understand that we are but small pieces within the greater Christian community and the greater Christian unity, that we are to understand that God has dwelled forever and God has ultimate power and ultimate glory. And there are times when people will really struggle with lives. And the first thing that they will do is look for a church. They will look for a sanctuary. They will look for a steeple. And they will walk to that steeple and they will sit in its pews and they will feel a sense of serenity and relief and peace as they struggle with what's going on in their life. That sanctuary becomes something of importance. We must never lose sight of that. We must grasp firmly that we have a sanctuary, and our sanctuary needs us, the church, just as much as we, the church, need the sanctuary.